Hello, welcome to Lucky Star Podcast. My name is Jhon. I am the co-editor of the LuckyStarFilm.net. With me today is my co-host, Seema, also an editor for Lucky Star. How are you?
Good.
And sitting in for the first time as third chair is Nathan, the last and final editor of Lucky Star to make an appearance on this podcast. How are you, Nathan?
I'm great, doing well, and very happy to be on the show.
Very, I'm sure.
We finally
Today,
found you worthy.
today we are getting together to discuss the best films of 2024. And over on the website, we have just posted, if everything went well, we have just posted our lists for the best films of 2024. We have invited several friends of ours who have contributed to the website behind the scenes to also give us their lists. Uh, Now, if you're just stumbling onto this randomly because you've been searching on YouTube for the best films of 2024, Lucky Star is a website dedicated to cinephilia, where we basically write about very niche topics like under discussed French directors and a lot of Argentine cinema for some reason, and definitely again I don't know why a lot of Japanese television, but that's basically what the website is. Once again, it's the luckystarfilm.net. That what we're here to do today is discuss our top tens as editors of the website, have a little bit of a discussion, and just have some fun in general. We are going to discuss. We're going to go from 10 to 1. And usually, what we'll do is if I have something at number 10, but Nathan has it at number 2, we'll wait until later on to discuss it in full. Um, and I believe that's all the introductory chit chat things I have before we begin our lists. You guys have anything to contribute before we start?
Nope, let's get into it.
Yeah, we have a lot of movies to get through. So I will start with my number 10, which is Greice, which is a film by Brazilian filmmaker Leonardo Mouramateus. It's a film that's I guess it's a Brazilian slash Portuguese production, and it's regarding has to do with a young Brazilian woman who goes to Portugal to study. She's kind of this Brazilian, kind of this. Excuse me, I'm going to keep saying Brazilian over and over again. Uh, she's this kind of screwball creation, straight out of like 1930s screwball comedies. Kind of like Catherine Hepburn in Bringing Up Baby, where she kind of everywhere she goes, she causes some sort of chaos because she just lies constantly to try to get out of jams. The film has this really kind of it kind of like almost art school vibe where everyone is just really cool and really hot, and the pleasure of the film is to watch this character uh, kind of get in situations that are ridiculous and try to lie her way out of them. The film doesn't really go out of its way to punish her or anything like that because the filmmaker I think really just enjoys kind of watching her go through life with this sort of this sort of like spirit basically, and the film wants to embody that spirit while still having it kind of crash a little bit into the real world. So a little bit of that kind of real taste for fiction and taste and a pleasure for fiction that this character embodies has to be negotiated a little bit with somewhat with basically some of the consequences of her actions. Uh, this is the film I watched due to my commitment to watching a crap load of Latin American cinema this year. Definitely one of the better ones that I saw.
And we should say that part of the reason you've been doing that is you've been curating this sort of festival in your hometown of Dallas dedicated to Latin American film. And so a lot of these have a lot of the films on your list that neither Seema nor I have seen are films that are not released yet. In fact, Greece, I think it played some festivals in South America, and I've noticed like people logging this one and it kind of getting some attention, but this probably won't get. I mean, there's a very low chance of it getting a sort of official release in the U.S., right?
Yeah. I mean, it's played some festivals in the U.S. I think it's playing in maybe like some AFI Latin American Film Fest. I forget where it is. Maybe Silver Springs. It's been theatrically released in Brazil at this point, and I'm sure it'll come out, on VOD at some point, and therefore get show up online. But yeah, this one hasn't. I don't think it's officially out yet. So what are Seema? What's your number 10?
Yeah, so my number 10 is also a Latin American film. So it's La Practica, The Practice by Martin Rejtman. And I think his first film since 9 or 10 years.
Yeah, I should say this is my number 10 as well. Actually, this is one where we sync up.
Oh, the fair ones which we sync up. Yeah, so it's I think one of my favorite things about the film, and the reason it's on my list is, and I was debating between multiple movies for this slot, as we all do, and two of the films I was debating between, both kind of in some ways similar, is Trueba's The Other Way and this one. Both of them start off with the idea of a long-term couple breaking up. In this case, it's a married couple that are going to get divorced. She's getting the apartment, he has the yoga studio, but they have to navigate both of them are yoga teachers. And it's a comedy built on just this very simple conceit of the practical difficulties of getting divorced, not having an apartment, and therefore having to stay with your brother and sister-in-law and their mother, and finding spaces to stay, who will get what piece of furniture. In the meantime, in his yoga studio, he has a room separator, a room divider that falls on a student, that makes him aware of kind of the legal risks he's taking by having this situation. And it kind of turns into this, on the one hand, it's if you've seen Martin Rejtman's other films, they all have, it's a comedy, and it's almost a formalist comedy, because it really relies on a lot of repetition, and repetition with variation, right? And also I think on some kind of geometry, where all these characters, and it's an ensemble film in many ways, because he keeps bumping into, it's his yoga students, it's like a woman he meets, it's some other guy who is stealing from his yoga studio, and so on, and different permutations and combinations, and it makes the whole place. He is in Chile, I think, because of his wife. He got married to a Chilean woman, so it almost makes Chile, the city in Chile, seem like it's just like 2 blocks, because everybody has a connection to everyone else. So it's a series of scenes between various combinations of these characters, and really a movie about, I think, being middle-aged, which, if anyone here relates to, it's me. And the idea of yoga, both as, and I think he takes yoga very seriously, but also a middle-aged yoga teacher, played wonderfully by Esteban. From The Delinquents, a movie that we've discussed on Lucky Star. It's a comedy that I think has a lot of is also really humanist somehow. And after watching a lot of Indian comedies that seem to revolve around skewering of characters, I think it's nice to see something that feels old-fashioned like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Rejtman is such an odd figure for me, because in Argentina, he's at one hand very major, a big name director, but he's also very like trapped in amber in this very specific moment in time in the 90s when he makes Sylvia Prieto, kind of, and I think the movies after that, it makes, maybe it kind of obfuscates some of what's actually going on in these films. And I think, I do think of him as a formalist, but someone who has a very delicate, almost like musical ear for rhythm and tone. And all of his movies have these very different kind of internal movements to them. His last feature is this film called Dos Disparos, Two Shots Fired, which is a really almost solemn movie. It's so very funny, but it has this almost funereal quality to it. And this year, he also made this very interesting documentary about these sort of migrant food delivery drivers, which is almost reminds me of something like Ackerman's De Est, or it's this very it's a movie that's a lot about this sort of urban environment and people moving through this urban environment, very quiet film. And you can kind of see some of that quality in La Practica, just these very pleasurable ways in which he arranges movements of bodies. There's this incredible cadence of the speech that everybody has. It's like this almost like a rapid fire bursts and repetitive bursts, like you feel that there's this sort of like beautiful movement that arranges these images, which sometimes are in these very plain spaces. It's almost hard to describe, but it feels like there's this sort of almost secondary musical touch, very solid thing, like you can touch it, all in addition to this really, I think, just beautifully written comedy of manners. And we should just say it's really funny. This is a movie that gets to do this sort of legendary comic strip manhole gag where somebody is walking and then falls into a hole. And he does it twice, and each time is better than the last. There's all of these sort of incredible comic gestures that sort of just really, really work. In a way that's almost sort of hard to describe without making it sound like less purely enjoyable than it really is.
Yeah, that one did not make the Latin American Film Festival Dallas, unfortunately. But I did enjoy it. Well, my number 9 is a film that Seema and I have discussed at length on episode 1 of the Lucky Star podcast. It's Juror number 2 by Clint Eastwood. A film I think has been, I think it's been received pretty well overall, if not had the best distribution that it could have gotten. And people, I don't know. I feel like it's a situation where people are like, well, Clint Eastwood's 94 years old at this point. We might not get another one. Probably time to celebrate a little bit of his career and of his stature, and kind of protest a little bit on his behalf. Like, hey, you shouldn't treat, basically a master like this, and kind of shunt him off to HBO Max land, like putting him out the pasture, basically. I don't have too much to say since I feel like we've already covered it pretty well on the previous episode. What's your number 9, Seema?
My number 9 is Stress Positions, but I'm not. Yeah, exactly. But I'm not going to talk about it because it's higher on.
Okay. Yeah, so it'll show up higher on the list. What's your number 9?
Mine is also a skip.
Okay. All right. So we'll make sure to mention which ones, the position, where they're picked. My number 9 is a short film, which unfortunately do get the short end of the stick on these lists. They usually shunt it off to the side and say, well, here's the best shorts, but they're not really part of the top 10s or kind of the official list, if you will. Well, La Reputación is a short film by a filmmaker I think we all really like, Emmanuel Mouret. And he co-directs with a filmmaker I've kind of been tracking for the last couple of years called Carmen Leroi, who is a French filmmaker who so far only made shorts. Her first short was from 2018, and I think but the first one that really kind of got her attention was from 2020. It's called For Elsa. And well, she kind of, her last short, Sans Regret, stars Emmanuel Mouret, and she has co-written the new feature that just premiered, but none of us have seen it, unfortunately. 3 Friends. Now, La Reputación it stars Carmen Leroi as a film director who is working on the editing of her film, and she kind of hears that the editor she's working with has a reputation for seducing and bedding down women that he works with. But now we kind of get into this classic Mouret issue of, kind of fascination with why people think the way they do, why they do the things they do, she starts to obsess about why he hasn't made a move on her. So he brings it up. She brings it up to her friends. She brings it up even to her boyfriend. I'm like, hey, I'm working with this guy, but he hasn't done anything. And you look at the guy and you think this is not like a classic Lothario. It's just kind of like random person who just works there, and you wouldn't even think twice about him. And the whole movie is kind of based on this idea of this fascination and kind of following the train of thought, and possibly like that, the beginning of a sort of weird desire that springs within her about trying to understand why she's attracted to him, because he's not doing anything to her. He's not making any moves. He's not doing anything. It's a really funny movie. I really hope that we get to see the new feature soon.
How long is this short?
This is maybe 15 minutes, but it's like super concentrated. The usual. It's such a little small thing that I could tell that it was shot in the producers' like offices, because there's posters, for example, like for a Brazil film, I think that they co-produced. I think it was A La Ventura or whatever from like 2008. And I could tell like, oh, they shot this at the producers' offices. So it's a very small production, but it's really, really enjoyable. If you like Mouret films, I really, really recommend it.
Can't wait to watch it. My number 8, I think, is also a skip, so it'll come up later.
Mine would have been Seema's number 9, and that is Stress Positions, the debut feature by Theda Hammel, which is a kind of comedy set during this sort of first COVID summer in this sort of nexus around this Brooklyn apartment building. They refer to as the party house, in which the sort of kind of all of these groups with mostly queer New Yorkers in the course of their relationships essentially kind of crumbling or spiraling out or having already crumbled, sort of circle around this young, like 19 or 18-year-old kid who's sort of laid up in the basement with a broken leg, this sort of model. And so the movie does this very kind of curious thing where it moves, sort of through time. And it's actually one of the really great things about it is the way it kind of elliptically moves through quite a long period of time. This sort of all of this sort of comings and goings and kind of comedy movements of these people around the building, with this kid's sort of first person, mostly voiceover narration of his sort of life and past and his relationship with his mother, is moving to New York, these sort of hopes and dreams, and his own relationship to his sexuality and his queerness. If I hope what I'm getting across is a certain sense of the density of this movie, and it's almost kind of heterogeneous mixing of elements, all of this sort of almost feels like that, not necessarily a 1930s movie, but maybe a little bit of something like the diagonal directors around Vecchiali got from those 1930s movies. This sense that we can take comedy, very broad comedy, sort of melodrama or tragedy, and then in these sort of formalist elements, and just sort of throw them together in this way. And it just sort of quite brilliantly works. It's another movie like The Rejtman, which is just very, very funny. And sort of before you know it, I think takes on this sort of almost elegiac weight at points without kind of getting it. The director, Theda Hammel, she acts in it. She's incredible. Just this sort of wonderful kind of, sense of...
Super charismatic.
Yeah, but just like it's a movie, also a film, which I think just has a real pleasure and understanding of language. There's a real kind of sense. All these characters have like their own style of speaking. There's great one-liners, and I think I often kind of struggle with American films. I always really want a healthy and thriving American cinema, and I feel like so often I'm just bashing my head against work that just doesn't seem to live up. It just seems provincial and unformed, and it's really exciting to see an American debut that is, I think, this strong.
Yeah, totally agree with everything you said. And for me, it was between this and A Different Man. This is, I mean, it's been a long time since I liked American sort of independent to mid-budget comedies of this sort. I think for a lot of the reasons you described, Ethan, which is uh, people just don't speak like I'm used to hearing people speak in real life. And it all feels, something about it just never feels right to me. And I was surprised that this year, actually, I liked quite a few of them, but these two were on top of my list. And I think partly, I think Stress Positions ended up on my list versus A Different Man because I didn't expect to like it at all. The last thing I thought I would have on my list is a movie about Bushwick 20 to 30, late 20 something stuck at home during COVID and doing drugs at a party with some teenager. It's
That's not your life. That's not your
not
life.
yeah, that was not on my bingo card for this year at all. And even when it started, I went into it with a certain reservation, and it really completely surprised me, charmed me. It feels so thought through, and it just seems so. She seems to be in such good control of her material, and her actors seem to know exactly the kind of film that they are in, um, which is again often not the case with this kind of film. And the other thing that I really liked about it is that between all of them, I think she co-wrote it with the actor who plays the model, who becomes the voice and kind of the soul of the film in many ways. um it's really questioning this idea of this found family that the queer community in this neighborhood, or in a lot of this kind of neighborhood, um, that seems to form. And in the beginning, it often feels like exactly like finally I have found my people, right? And you come in and it feels very comforting. Everybody is so encouraging and supportive and gives you a place to sleep and everything. But then it also leads to this very tangled web of the same, the relationships are all within that same community. The breakups happen within the same community. Alliances and loyalties are put to the test.
It's quite alarmingly bitter. Like there's the director's character is sort of in the sort of end of a relationship with this woman, and at some point has to tell someone, we were in love. Like there was actual love
and
there.
watching the film, you forget that could have ever been the case, because when we start the film, they're already at the end of that, at the end stages of that relationship. And simultaneously, because by having the teenage kid be half Moroccan, born and raised in the US, mind you, but half Moroccan by on his father's side, uh, it manages to get a lot of comedy out of um, even the liberal, or at least self-believing liberal Americans, complete lack of knowledge about world geography and international politics. Uh, and and those jokes actually land. They are really funny. And it's also kind of, it is questioning whether, I mean, is it really okay that this is how we live our lives? That if we, how can our self belief about who we are be at such odds with what we actually know and what we actually spend time trying to understand?
And I would sort of, I guess the one last thing I'll add before we move on is that the movie in some strange sideways fashion ends with a kind of call to performance and fiction and inauthenticity, which is, I think quite intriguing and kind of exciting. But yeah, a real surprise.
Yeah, and it has that question throughout the movie, right? Because about writing, about do you write about, is it more interesting to write about your real life, or is it more interesting to write fiction? Like create a fiction around your life.
Yeah.
Anyway,
A
So-
call of fiction does seem diametrically opposed to a lot of what's going on in contemporary independent American cinema. I have not seen that one. I'll be honest, I saw the trailer and I thought this looks a little unappealing to me.
yeah,
because
I thought the same thing, and I'm not quite sure. I mean, this is the year I've watched the most number of 20-year movies.
I think
from this
Nathan
year.
forced you to.
Yeah, so I was
I will also
yeah.
say we watched it with my parents on Christmas Day, which is a movie that involves someone dying by a man dying by having sex with attempting sex with a electric
massage device.
and they loved it. They loved the movie.
I don't think your mom understood what was happening there.
But
You guys have sold me on it, so I'm hoping to watch it soon. Okay, well, my number 7 is The Major Tones, directed by Ingrid Pokropek, another film that I was able to see due to my intense commitment to Latin American cinema. And I'll be honest, that the main reason why I originally wanted to see the film is because I saw these images of it, and I thought to myself, they made Petite Solange in Buenos Aires. There's one image of this girl like at a coffee shop at night, and I'm thinking that is a direct image that's from Petite Solange, and like the windbreaker that she's wearing, the clothes that she's wearing, and like the images of her walking through the city. I'm like, wow, they remade that movie. I love that movie. Let's watch that movie. Obviously, The Major Tones, it's its own different thing. It's very much concerned with the documentary element of seeing this young girl make her way to Buenos Aires, getting on taxis, getting on buses, going through all around the city on her own, and just documenting that experience of what it feels like, while kind of inserting this one little fantastical element that kind of makes the city around her sort of magical. And that's where she has like a metal plate in her arm, and apparently she begins to hear noises that are emanating from the plate, which are apparently some sort of message that's coded. And she tries to figure out exactly what the message is telling her, and that leads to an exploration of the city going forward. It's a very, it's not reinventing the wheel of coming of age cinema, but it was incredibly accomplished version of a movie that I just happened of a type of movie that I just happen to really love. And yeah, I really, really like The Major Tones. That this one also has not been picked up for distribution. Unfortunately, I imagine it's not going to be because these movies just don't come out in the US, unfortunately. It has got some festival play. I believe it played in Seattle, might have played in Miami, perhaps, in festivals. But maybe this year it'll come out for you guys to see. What's your number 7, Seema?
Mine is another skip. It'll come back later.
Okay.
Yeah, mine is a movie that I wrote a little bit about for our site, a movie called Raayan, which is officially the second film directed by Dhanush, who also stars. He's a major Tamil star, in some ways maybe the kind of most significant star of this generation, this sort of second half of this Tamil new wave that's been going on since the early 2000s. It's kind of a neighborhood film, in the kind of old Warner Brothers sense. It's this sort of orphan family, this brother taking care of his 3 younger siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, in this kind of rough neighborhood in Chennai. He has a food truck, and there's this sort of like sense of a kind of city with all of this violence that has reached a kind of quiet point, in which he has sort of participated to some degree, to enough that people are very frightened of him. Certain things happen that sort of turns this violence back on again, mostly through the director turned character actor and kind of star S.J. Surya as this villain, in this kind of incredible villain role. And the kind of crux of the film really becomes that, Dhanush, who sees himself as the protector, especially of his younger sister and his two brothers, this sort of control and love that he feels for them kind of turns into resentment, and they sort of betray him and things go horribly wrong. It's a movie that gestures to these sort of big hero, Masala hero things, this sort of interval point where like in Rajnikant's beloved Basha, where the sort of meek hero, taciturn hero sort of explodes into violence for the first time. And this movie is a very unsettling sequence. It the kind of cheers catching your throat. It's a movie that's almost sort of unbearably intense at points. I watched it with a very crowded audience, and I could feel them kind of withdrawing from the film as it went on, as the sort of like knife gets pushed further and further into the characters. It's very accomplished. It's very beautiful. There's this kind of, I don't know, this sort of like intense nighttime feeling to it that almost reminds me of some of the kind of action films of Soi Chiang. The sort of seriousness with its violence, comes through. Just really kind of a striking film. And if you've been following Dhanush and his brother Selvaraghavan, who is a sort of really essential filmmaker from that early 2000s Tamil New Wave, who also acts in this, it really reconfigures some of the sort of mythology of their own life and their own cinema in all of these other forms. And now that Dhanush is sort of this older man and he's playing this sort of father figure rather than this young man, it's just sort of very moving on its own. You feel the weight of now 2 decades, more than 2 decades of cinema, and sort of a life, and it's another movie. A.R. Rahman is a legendary composer, but one thing with Tamil cinema is that you have this recourse to music, to like real music that's written for the film, songs, and it takes a point. I think it ends with this kind of lullaby, the sort of beautiful music that Rahman can conjure out of thin air, when he really cares about a project. And when all of these sort of elements, this sort of melodrama, this emotion, this kind of form, the genre form, and the music, it all kind of combines. There's just nothing quite like it. It's maybe not on the level of, there are several other Tamil movies will come up in our list, and it's maybe not on that level of masterpiece that I think those are, but it's sort of the kind of movie you can only get when you have this sort of commercial auteur cinema, which is really working on this kind of fundamental level, kind of like when we got those, legendary Clint Eastwood movies from his sort of 90s run.
Yeah, I think just not to. I think part of why the audience, we watched it separately, each of us in the cinema, and I think part of it, just beyond just the darkness of it all, is also that the violence from the midpoint onwards is pretty insane in this movie, and it feels morally justified to me, because the movie has set up, but right in the beginning the movie has set up that this man who has since childhood has this almost inhuman level of strength. He just seems to be he can destroy an army single-handedly, kind of strength, superhuman strength. The only thing that can prompt him to violence is any violence done to his sister. So it has that consistency of action, and that's the only motive that drives him ever. It's the one last job, but it's the one last job because this is the one principle that he cannot let go of. But I do think that I saw it with a crowd of people, and there were a lot of women there, and I think it was hard to watch even for them, because the female character also is equally capable of violence, as it turns out, because it all runs in the family, as you know.
All right, my number 6 is Chime by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. One of 3 films that he directed and released last year, and the only one I own on the NFT. So I got it legitimately by paying, what was it, like 2,500? It was some absurd amount. When I first saw it, I thought that this is kind of like, Kurosawa kind of doing a little bit of karaoke of himself. But I will say that there's very little of him playing the hits that I don't enjoy. That kind of effortless dread that his compositions can evoke. Taking the very mundane cooking class and immediately putting you on the edge, because of the sound design, because you see knives everywhere, because of the way he composes his images, the way he isolates certain things in the frame. Immediately you're like, okay, something bad is going to happen. And from there, going from that sort of taking those mundane spaces and just injecting them with pure dread, the film kind of goes outward into the home. It goes outward into the city streets, and you sort of out of nowhere end up with, like, you feel like the world is going to end, which is kind of how a lot of Kurosawa movies usually end. So maybe not the most original of the Kurosawa projects, probably, but deeply, deeply pleasurable in its total horror. I really, really enjoyed this one.
We saw it as well, and this was part of my list is made up of part of my list creation process was not including movies that I was pretty sure either one of you or at least someone on our list would include, and this was one of them. But yeah, I do the making the mundane seem terrifying is so true, because taking out the garbage or the recycling that she keeps doing, it doesn't even turn into anything, and I still shudder when I think of that scene in that movie.
It's the noise of that scene, how like the cans are just like rattling in your head afterwards.
Yeah.
And they just kind of like, they keep, you keep hearing that noise throughout.
Yeah, and I think really every time I watch his movies, especially the ones that are like Chime, you're reminded of how much of fear is actually just about being unsettled, rather than there being actually something to be afraid of. And I think this whole movie is just so extremely upsettingly unsettling for me. Yeah, great movie, just like you, greatest hits. So what?
It's got a great job interview scene. I feel like
Oh yeah, the job
with
interview scene is great.
its own horror scene. Just do not act like that guy during that job interview.
Yeah, it's great.
Seema, what's your number 6?
Skipping again.
Okay.
My number 6 was Seema's number 8 choice. It is Ruka on the Road, the television version of Shunji Iwai's Kyrie project or Kyrie project, which so far has been a 2-hour Netflix release, a 3-hour theatrical, and I believe Blu-ray version, and now about 5-hour long TV series.
Yeah, 5+ hour, 10-episode TV series.
Which is, you just mentioned Kiyoshi Kurosawa, doing this sort of NFT film. I think of Iwai as like all of the filmmakers that sort of emerged in Japan post this sort of collapse of the economic bubble of the 80s as a real survivor. He has made short films, medium-length films, these sort of pop projects, animation. He reconfigures older work into sort of all of these different forms. This is sort of this very classic Japanese production model, where he's working with this kind of pop star. Aina the End, although she's much more of an auteur in this project, she's a songwriter as well. And it is this sort of kind of extravagant and very bare bones melodrama about this sort of young girl who loses her family in the kind of
In the
earthquake,
311 earthquake.
in the 311 earthquake, and sort of ends up being this kind of itinerant musician on the streets of Tokyo. The miniseries sort of does this sort of extraordinary thing where it takes several hours before you get to the adult character. You see her as a little girl, you see her as a sister who is a double, a physical double played by the same actress that she ends up growing into. She's sort of adopted. You learn the story of her sister and the sort of boyfriend. You learn the story of, this friend, the one friend she has in this hometown. When she goes to Tokyo, the friend appears again wearing wigs as this sort of scammer. She's also taken on another name. The young girl Ruka takes on her dead sister's name, Kairi, to become this musician. And the movie just lets these musical performances play out in full length. The final episode is an hour long and has sort of this whole concert of all these different musicians. And as it sort of builds up this thing, as it builds up these music performances one after the other, you kind of understand this woman sort of finding her kind of adult voice as a person and sort of moving, even as her friend is this sort of, in and out, almost becomes this ghostly presence in her life. There's almost, it's weird to say, but because it's very different and the form is very different, but there's almost like a Rebellion quality to some of these scenes, this kind of fantasy in plain air, this sort of people moving and colliding. The episodes are even, the early ones are called, Ruka to Maori, kind of like the Out One titles. And when the series needs to sort of confront, really difficult to articulate emotion, it does it very frontally, like very head on. Really a surprise. I haven't seen an Iwai film in a very long time, although he's always a fascinating filmmaker. And I was just really taken by it. And sort of watching this, an hour a night over the course of like a week or so was, I don't know, it was a very, very, very moving experience. And I think a real argument for what filmmakers can do with this kind of long form work in 2024, even as I think a lot of the bloom is off the rose of streaming for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, one of my favorite things as well from this year, number 8 on my list. And I've liked Iwai for a very long time, and I particularly, it's notable that Iwai, I think for his first film, where he won an award, where he is shooting, I think, younger children than what we see in this film. And it's all of the regard for it was about how he was able to capture them in their most natural state. And I think he just retains that even with older, teenagers. Often in his movies, these are people don't the teenagers that are the protagonists of his films often don't express through words. In this, it's literal because Ruka literally cannot speak ever since the traumatic episode of the earthquake where she loses her family. She can only sing and she cannot speak. But it's not just Ruka, it's all the people around her as well. And I think he just has this way of being able to both give us a really intimate view while somehow letting them it feels almost like they are just talking to each other or playing music or singing the way they would naturally. It feels very little control from the outside, very little of a brief has been given because of how natural it all seems. And in this movie, he's working with she keeps performing with different street performers. So there's a lot of musicians. I believe they are real musicians that he found in Japan to work with them. And incredible to see how well he's able to get them all to be a part of this pretty coherent story, really, at the end, even though it feels like a series of, music performances.
Yeah, and the one thing is, it's a long film, and I do think there's a sort of very interesting kind of novelistic quality to a lot of these Japanese films that emerge after Heaven's Story, Takahisa Zeze's film from 2011. This is a movie which covers a lot of ground and also has sort of, will spend 40 minutes on a very mundane scene and then sort of elide entire crucial years or scenes or things in people's lives. I haven't seen the shorter versions, but apparently they're quite eccentric in what he leaves in and takes out from this. But already this version is sort of making these very bold choices of what to include on screen and what to leave as kind of...
I think the illusions, though, are, I mean, like the way memory works, right? It's specific. When you think about your school life, for instance, you remember very specific incidents. You don't remember the entire progression. And when you remember two disparate incidents, often you've changed quite a bit between those two incidents. So he jumps in that way. I think it's very accurate to how we remember our stories from the past, or a teenager's stories, really.
Sounds really good. I glad to hear you guys finally getting to some J drama. We gotta. I mean, we gotta get you watching some more.
Did it for you, Jhon.
I haven't seen a Shunji Iwai movie in forever. Like, incredible. I can't remember the last time I saw one. It must be like since Hannah and Alice, probably since that long time. Yeah. My number 5 is actually very directly related to J drama. It's the Teasing Master Takagi-san, which is the theatrically released feature adaptation of the manga directed by Rikiya Imaizumi, and it is the direct continuation of an 8-episode TV show, also directed by Imaizumi. So I kind of want to say that this inclusion is for both, but I really love the TV show itself, which focuses on these characters when they're 12 to 13 years old. But it's the film version that I'm including. And Teasing Master Takagi-san is basically about a couple of kids. Takagi-san is the girl, and who basically spends her entire school day teasing the kid who sat next to her. Now, what that looks like is sometimes little pranks, like she'll hide in a locker and spook him when he's by himself and to scare him. And other times, she'll tell him that there's a rumor that if you write the name of the person you love on an eraser, and once you erase it all the way until it's gone, that person will fall in love with you. So he's immediately thinking, wonder whose name is written on that eraser. And he actually gets the eraser, but he only looks at one side. And it's some random thing that he's not sure what it is. But that's part of the teasing game, is to make him think, oh, I wonder if she likes me, or do I like her? And it's basically trying to confuse him. And it's this kind of overt. And these teasing games basically become they kind of substitute for what would be a traditional romance, in Japanese television or cinema, where there might be, love declarations and holding hands and things like that, which make up a lot of traditional pop cinema in Japan. All of it is sublimated into these little games. The interesting thing about the film, which takes place 10 years after the series, is that it has to adapt those games into something that makes sense for actual 23-year-olds. So you can't really play those same games because they mean something different in the body of a young adult. So it has to negotiate. So the whole film is about revisiting those same spaces of the TV show and seeing what has changed and what hasn't, trying to negotiate that difference between what these characters actually want and trying to go beyond that teasing game into something that may perhaps be actual love. I think it's beautiful. Honestly, I was so surprised by this movie, by this whole project really, because it's done with such patience. It's done with such like careful delineation of the emotional states of these characters. And there's like some, it's really dumb humor, honestly, where this little boy is getting like completely freaked out because he thinks that maybe she likes him, and like maybe she's thinking about him differently than she lets on, and he's like completely losing his mind and going huh over and over again throughout the run of the show. And what's funny is in the feature length version, almost like that character has to be the most innocent 23-year-old of all time. She asks him like, "Hey, do you have a girlfriend?" He's like, "Who, me? Never. I'm never gonna have a girlfriend." And it this very kind of ridiculous way of handling this premise while still keeping it very kind of down to earth and having it make sense. Honestly, I wrote about it for our best of 2024 post. It's a project that definitely caught me by surprise. I was not expected to love it as much as I do, and now Imaizumi is definitely on my watch list for anything he does.
Yeah, so
Seema, what's your number 5?
yeah, so I think both of us are skips, and so it's up to you next for your number 4.
Oh, which means if you're both skipping, that means we have a lot of stuff to talk about in the last 4 spots. My number 4 is One Last Bloom. One Last Bloom by Takahisa Zeze, which is probably one of the lucky star directors, if we're being honest. Someone who kind of unites all 3 of us in excitement, in interest. One Last Bloom is his boxing melodrama. It's got it all. It's got old, wizened boxing coaches who are ready to retire, but must, get back into the ring to train a young man who kind of has nothing to lose, kind of the $1 million baby formula, if you will, which goes back God knows how many years.
Yeah.
It's got great training sequences, which you must in a boxing film. It's got surprising way of moving through time that is kind of the reason why why it takes you by surprise, even though it's dealing with material that is on its face incredibly cliched and like stock. But that's what I find so interesting about Zeze, is the way that he is able to find his way into material that at on its face you can kind of dismiss it and say, oh, that's just a run of the mill melodrama. You don't have to engage with it. You don't have to think about it too much. But there's a specificity about the way he is able to find his way into that material that I find really, really impressive. And almost in these last run of melodramas, the last few years, almost always bring me to tears. It just works.
Yeah, so I think one of like Zeze's pet themes that goes back to his sort of like turn of the millennium film Anarchy in Japan is this sort of idea of this generation of Japanese adults, who kind of, burn through the country's prosperity in the 1980s and leave the kind of next generations with nothing. And this is now in this film and in a really great film from the 2010s called The Promised Land, kind of goes up against this sort of population decline in Japan. The idea that we have this aging population. And so one of the strange things about this movie is this very uneasy sense that in this, as Jhon said, this cliche relationship of the kind of older boxer coming back to train this sort of young upstart, that there's this almost vampiric quality to it. especially as the fights happen and you have this sort of violence rained down on this young body. There's a real uneasy sense of who is this for, who is profiting, whose sort of fantasies are being lived out. And then the title comes back at this end. It ties together in this very kind of strange way. It certainly, I think there's something quite unsettling going on through this movie's melodrama beats, and I think we should also just say the ferocity of some of the images here is really quite something. I was quite surprised by it.
Yeah, I think to your point about the vampiric, sense you get is that even his opponent, the as usual, like the opponent who is a star versus the upstart that no one knows about, the so-called star kid who initially we think is going to be this awful human being, just this bully who's going to cheat somehow to win the title. Really, even when you see the last big fight, both of these kids are just having their bones broken, their bodies are getting destroyed equally. That other kid turns out to not be any villain at all. He's just a kid who feels like a star because everyone says that to him. And his coach, the woman who owns the fancier gym, all of it, they all seem to just be blind to what is actually happening to these kids and what is the end game here, like what are they gaining from it. So unlike even those traditional films of the old boxing master training the ingenue, I think at the end there's no sense of victory to be had. At least I didn't feel any triumph at the end. I just felt sad. I
Yeah,
think
there's
the
something to
movie.
it. There's something to it, kind of like what we're how I brought up Million Dollar Baby. That's the private drama of the older trainer being played across the body of the younger one, who who basically has to establish his own kind of, if not independence, his own reason, her own reason, Million Dollar Baby, for fighting and trying to kind of assert their own individuality. At the end of the film, that final battle, the final fight, you feel like the film is trying to establish the individuality of that character, so it's not just about the trainer. But yeah, there's definitely that level to it as well.
Mm.
And the ending of the film is so, you're wondering what was the sacrifice that happens in the film. What was it worth? What did it
What was it
add
for?
up to? What did it add up to? It's and that kind of an ambiguity to that melodrama, which is, I have to be clear, like it works. It's played in a way that engages your emotions, but there's just enough to kind of make you question your own response to it as well, or to give it a little bit of a twist that makes you think, okay, there's more going on here as well. That's one of the reasons why I really respond to Zeze's work. So you guys skipped sorry, your number five is already skipped. Number four for Seema, what is it?
Yes. So my number four is Thomas Aslan's Scorched Earth. It's a sequel to um, In the Shadows, which was from
2010.
yeah. So yeah, over a decade. Yeah. The same central character basically comes back, and the central character Trojan is essentially this model of rationality, efficiency. He is the um like master assassin, master you know s- criminal in some ways.
Kind of like Parker
Yeah, exactly.
or the Samurai, right?
Yeah, it's all right. Just this person who can put his who treats his job as a place where emotions cannot exist. Only cold logic must exist, and every decision he makes is carefully calculated. And so both are adventures of Trojan, right? I like Scorched Earth even, and both of them are, Arslan makes, um, you know, Berlin just, he kind of splits the movie between making Berlin, the city, look like this incredible, all neon and dark, black and glass and neon urban space, and then invariably Trojan has to escape to the suburbs, which just look like the bleakest, gray and uh, fair, and that's where most of the actual humans live. Um, both of the films, Thomas Aslan's, the beauty of both of these films is that they're kind of the perfect epitome of this kind of film, where it all starts with what's the heist going to be in this movie? How are we going to execute it? Of course, something's got to go wrong in the middle. And then what does Trojan do, once the, twist happens? But in the shadows, both movies I love very much, but in the shadows, there is still, I still think that the idea of Trojan, which is really what is the most seductive thing about this movie, the idea of Trojan, I don't think Arslan has thought it through as perfectly as he has now with Scorched Earth. In that movie, despite having this Parker like character in the middle, there's inconsistencies. I still think that in that movie, there's decisions Trojan makes that don't make sense. Um, Overall, like it doesn't, it's not composed perfectly, and the whole, this kind of movie, when it works, has to be perfectly composed, because it's like a little game, in itself. It's a puzzle inside, and you want to see how it's all been built. And in Scorched Earth, I think the puzzle works beautifully. You know why? Because Trojan's enemy is another Trojan. Trojan's partner and romantic lead is yet another Trojan. So really, it's a battle of, three kind of humans with machine-like um, abilities, playing different, the dynamics between these three versions of that character. One who is a professional, this is his way of making a living. One who is a subordinate partner to him, and one who is his opponent, who's a hired hand for the, enemy. Yeah, I think about 90 minutes.
Yeah. And I know people said this with the Fincher Killer movie, but this one really does feel like a question of like what work and such things mean in the modern era, right? Like it's all about like the kite. It's a movie where the heist goes perfectly, and then the rest of it is just trying to hound down someone to like pay you for what you've done. It's basically about trying to get freelance work paid.
It's a gig economy.
What does it mean to steal things when like value has been moved into this sort of not so tangible realm, of the digital and everything. It's quite strange, and this feeling of disappointment that sort of hovers around this is really, it's really kind of intriguing.
And I think there's a real there is a real question about what does money mean. Like there's a joke in the movie about you can't he used to, in the previous movie, he used to steal Rolexes, and you can't steal Rolex anymore because they all have, you can't, they have no resale value because they have authentication, and so they'll trace it back as a stolen good, and nobody wants to buy stolen goods. And but there is this idea of like, firstly, the amounts of money are very precise, and you realize that even in the world of crime, the money is no longer there. There's only like small amounts of money. So Trojan's got to come back every year, and we're going to get a new Arslan part 3 by virtue of that, right? Blessing for me, a curse for Trojan. But Hockhausler's last movie has that idea as well from last year, about, Hockhausler's movie has this idea that now the criminals are people who have like some bizarre encrypted technology that lets you sell drugs on the internet. That it's not like the whole idea of physical goods, gold, diamond, the usual things we're used to seeing stolen and smuggled. Even drugs. I mean, all of it is just passe now, and it's some abstract. Money is just increasingly abstract. Money and wealth. Which just
I
makes it nice because we are poor anyway. So if it's all fake, what does it matter?
Nathan, what's your number 4?
My number 4, which was Seema's number 7, is a film called Mayalagan by the second film by writer-director C. Prem Kumar, which is a movie that came out sort of fall this year, and really quickly. I mean, 96 is his previous movie, was one of those movies that people, put underneath their pillow when they go to bed. It's a movie that people sort of rewatch and rewatch and rewatch. And this one is sort of quietly, I think, sort of become the same thing. It's a sort of very long, very kind of deliberate sort of melodrama about this man who returns to his hometown after many, many, many years, due to a kind of hazily described financial slight by family members that sort of robbed him and his family of this home that meant so much to him when he was a child. He comes back for a cousin's wedding and sort of reconnects with this very ebullient man played by the great actor Karthi, who he can't remember. And sort of this sort of man with all of his kindness and all of his energy keeps insisting that this main character played by Arvind Swamy is one of the most important figures in his life. And he can't remember his name, and every chance he tries to find, he can't remember the name, and it becomes this long night in which these two men drink and talk about the Karthi character's life and history, and this sort of asides about the history of Tamil Nadu and its recent history in politics and all of the kind of real achievements and suffering that have come in these years. And it becomes this sort of this idea that he doesn't know this man's name becomes this kind of unspeakable weight of everything that he's allowed to kind of fester in his own life. And he's a happy man. He has a wife, he has a child, a very happy child. His father is very happy. They have this life in the city. He feeds parrots, feeds dozens and dozens of parrots on his roof. And yet there's this something inside him that won't heal, that won't go away, that sort of like pricks at him. I saw this weirdly in the same week that I saw Arnaud Desplechin's Jimmy P, which is a film that I don't think was really particularly well liked or understood when it released, but is another film about talking to someone, therapy just being this thing in which you can talk to someone, and by putting your own life into words, you can kind of understand where you've ended up. And this movie, I think, does a very similar thing of just letting these two men talk back and forth, and sort of finding a way to be who you are in the world or already are. And it's also very funny. It's another movie where I think, music, there's this sort of allows this level of this register of emotion to kind of exist alongside the film. So the movie is allowed to be this sort of incredible outpouring of emotion and also be very kind of low key in a way. It's a hard movie to describe. And I think it's funny. It was sort of released, it was a modest success, and they basically cut out 15, 20 minutes of the movie, to 15 very crucial minutes in terms of the movie's rhythm and kind of meaning, but not plot. It's not a movie with a lot of plot.
So it got released and then they re-released it.
Yeah, with the shorter version, and that's a version that ended up on Netflix. And I think it's a real testament that the sort of great cinephile fan of these movies, Chris loves movies from Texas, went through and delicately, with the help of all of these like translators, recreated the lost movie through cam rips, through YouTube promo videos, through all of these things, and sort of recirculated this healed cut of the movie along with letters. And so you would see for like a couple of weeks, someone in the community saying like, finally gonna watch this movie on Netflix, and people would be, no, bro, I'm gonna DM you, I'm gonna make sure you see the real version. You need the 10 minutes of them like drinking wine out of or beer out of earthenware jugs in the middle of the night and talking about Tamil history, and I think, we talk so much about like where cinephilia is, and there's so much of talk about cinephilia as this sort of doomed talk, and it's nice to be reminded that it's alive in a very real way, and it's alive because of movies, and it's people's response to these movies.
Why is it called the potato cut? That's what I want. Why is it called?
You gotta watch the movie to find out.
To know that would be literally spoiling
the movie.
I will try to watch it.
One of the movies it reminded me of is, for multiple reasons. One, because the second half of the movie is literally people talking, just having a conversation between two men, and that's a pretty rare thing to see in a movie. But also for other reasons is, it reminded me of Mike Lee for that reason, but it reminded me specifically of Happy Go Lucky. And when Happy Go Lucky came out, my reaction to it prior to watching the movie, just from watching the trailer, was immediately, and I really like Mike Lee, and I watched the trailer and I thought, I am not going to like this movie, not realizing that is precisely what Mike Lee is arguing for in that movie, right? That Poppy character is somebody that you're instantly irritated by. And in many ways, I think the character that Karthi plays in this movie from the beginning is a very Poppy-like character. He's so loving and affectionate and accepting and helpful. Just think of the adjective your mom wants, from whoever comes into your life, put that on, and that's Karthi for you. And as human beings, most of us, are aware of our own flaws, and we find anyone who seems that way, we either view them with irritation or skepticism or a mixture of both, right? Like there must be there's something going on there. Like, no way somebody is like this. And that's Arvind Swami's reaction to Karthi for a bunch of the movie. And I think, that it's hard even to see filmmakers there's something almost embarrassing, I think, about making a film about a character like that and saying a person like this can exist. I think there's something to that, in a world where everybody has I think we're all mostly pieces of shit for what it's worth. And to say that there can be people who are like just good people, and I'm going to make a movie about a good person. I think it's embarrassing for a young filmmaker to do that, or feel embarrassing. And I think that he did it, and that people accepted it and actually fell in love with it, gives me hope for humanity. Maybe we can, because I do think a lot of people watched that movie and were like, yeah, we want to be more like that Karthi guy. Partially because they have a crush on Karthi, but also I really think it's a very endearing character. And like Arvind Swami, we start to question, like, what's with all this hate and anger all the time?
I mean,
what's the point?
I feel like in like the kind of worries about or our worries or anxieties about tourism in, the 2020s is always framed as if, like the Howard Hawks or like the Joseph H. Lewis or something. Like, what if we miss them? Like, what if they're out there? This movie is kind of like, what if there's like the Leo McCarey of Going My Way, and people just didn't like look for it, right? And it's, I think, there was a lot of fear in the last couple years, right? Because Tamil cinema had especially these sort of like huge action hits, right? Like Vikram by Lokesh Kanagaraj, being the kind of big one. And there was a real worry that those were going to kind of shift the cinema completely in that direction, that we would get sort of these, kind of action spectacles, and that would sort of be it. And then to see this movie, which goes against sort of any commercial inclination, really, in almost any way, just sort of exist down in the world is really exciting. It's a great thing. And I think it's also like quite far, when people sort of see Indian cinema in the 2020s sort of from a distance, this movie's virtues are completely not what I think people expect to find in mainstream cinema.
Yeah. So we are top 3.
Leo McCarey. Okay, I gotta watch that one. My number 3 is Nathan's number 5, I believe. It's Territorio by Jose Celestino Campuzano, who is a filmmaker I think Nathan has seen a lot of. I've seen a lot less. This film, once again, a product of my deep commitment to Latin American cinema. Campuzano is a figure. I haven't seen that many of his films, but he's someone who kind of interests me in the sense that he's someone you can tell immediately, this guy is unique. Like, this guy is unique in the way he approaches characterization, the way he approaches kind of registering like setting. He's unique in the way he treats, or in the way he kind of treats actors. He's unique in I guess in this film in particular, because of the way the film's qualities almost derive exactly from the qualities of the character. So because the character is someone who, is deeply concerned with dignity, with honor, with respect for people, the movie tries to embody those characteristics and tries to see how they manifest themselves in the real world of the film, how those things can be, it's deeply concerned with what fathers pass down to sons, and how there's a breakdown between generations, right?
Also a boxing movie.
Also a boxing movie. My friend watched this, and my friend watched this film, and he said the punches never land in his movie. But I find the critique of Campuzano, that the actors aren't that great, or that it's a little bit, I don't know, like cheap looking, if you will. I don't know. I find that to be completely missing the point of kind of what he's after.
Yeah, he's addressed this. He's like, you turn on any like TV show and the actors are worse than mine, but nobody complains. He's like, it's because my guys are like, everyone knows they're not actors, because it's because they're, just guys that I found out in the world. That's why they get this. That it's not about the quality of acting. It's a sort of more complicated response.
Yeah, I feel like he's always trying to find people who kind of make sense in the space that he's filming in. He's using people from the community that he's studying his stories in. He's saying, hey, we're gonna, the boxing gym. Like, I was wondering about this boxing gym. Like, is this a realistic boxing gym? I have no clue. How this boxing gym might look like in a small town like this one. Maybe it is. Maybe it is completely realistic. Maybe it is completely, but to me, like, that's kind of beside the point, because in the film, you have this character who's kind of I guess a bodyguard, if you will, for kind of for a politician, local politician, and you see the way that basically that character's attitudes and morality is completely disregarded by the world, right? The politicians screw him over. The kids don't listen to him. He can't, like, his own kid keeps getting in trouble. And all the things he wants to pass on in the world, basically the world is saying to him, those things don't matter anymore. The old ways of doing things, the old ways that this character has spent his life basically trying to embody, none of that matters anymore. And it's such to me, kind of a surprising movie from Campuzano. I mean, again, I don't claim to be an expert on him, but I think you've seen a lot more, Nathan. But it's a surprising film because it's so tender.
Yeah, Campuzano. We should be kind of clear. Campuzano's sort of both a major figure in the sort of new Argentine cinema and also kind of marginal at the same time, right? He's always sort of brought in as, like, if there's a kind of I think I first saw him when Matias Pinheiro programmed an Argentine film series at Anthology Film Archives. And if, it's like every single movie in there is this very literate, very literary thing, often like Pinheiro's own movies, with these sort of urbane kids and everything. And Campuzano sort of like gets treated as like the guy from the other Argentina. That's sort of the function he gets used in criticism. And he's very prolific. He's hard to keep up with. A lot of these movies don't end up subtitled. They don't end up screening. He's got multiple movies in 2024, some of which aren't even on like IMDb yet. So he goes through a lot of different modes, but there's always this sense of this kind of like symphonic world, there's like you've ended up in this middle of this neighborhood where there's like these families and these people and these political parties and these gangs, and there's sort of all of these different moving pieces, and everyone has their own kind of energy and their own way of speaking, and like there's a real elegance in the way these movies are constructed, but there's often like a lot of different types of genre kind of bouncing off because these people live in different lives. And I think what Jhon is saying is true. This one is where you get this real central figure. He feels almost a little bit like the older John Wayne in some of the late Hawks movies, and in some way that there's like that feeling of almost like a directorial brotherhood. And it really does kind of keep this guy in the center in a way that even like Vikingo isn't in the movies he's in. And it takes on, it's just this sort of like about how to walk through the world, about a way of walking through the world. It's a very different kind of, it's not a late film, but it has the kind of confidence we think of as a late film. And it somehow feels both very small and very large at the same time, which is sort of something Campuzano has a real ability to do. I think he's a fascinating filmmaker, and I feel like he's a very articulate guy. His interviews are very interesting, but I feel like every time I read someone write about Campuzano or try to write about his practice or sort of write about his body of work, they just sort of get it wrong. Or they don't quite. It's like they see one side of the elephant,
Mm-hmm.
But and I also feel like as he's someone I've tried to write about for years. I think I've seen some of his films 5, 6, 7 times, and every time I give up. I feel like I don't.
So I'm gonna with Campuzano. The one thing I'll say to finish is that there's that last scene of the film of Territory. I would not have expected that level of, if not serenity, like the way that final scene plays out. I would not have expected that. So again, I'm still making my way to Campuzano, but completely took me by surprise. Um, really, really love that movie. Seema, I let you cheat with your number three. What's your number three?
Yeah, my number three. I know I said. Remember when I said I left off movies that I was sure either of you would put in? This is a situation where I kept these movies in because I knew both of you would not put these in. You, John, I'm not sure because I know you don't get to go out to the movies that much. Nathan, for other reasons. But my number three is both Trap by M. Night Shyamalan and Furiosa by Josh Miller. And it's on my list because uh, both of them are comprised by two really happy memories of going to a a much anticipated American, good old American style movie with a lot of people in the movie theater. That's a big movie, and I feel like I haven't had that experience that much in the last few years. There haven't been big movies. I think the last one I remember really enjoying is Avatar: Way of the Water. Um, and after that, I can't remember anything except for these two movies this year. Both movies that I think, I mean, between the two, I think Furiosa is the better movie. Um, so I had not watched. When did I think I started? I caught up on all of the newer Mad Max movies prior to Fury Road, just so that I would. And I think Fury Road was the first one I went and saw in the theater, and then followed by Furiosa. And uh, I think Furiosa really is the one for me where um, even beyond all the gorgeous spectacle that is this apocalyptic world that George Miller has created, and all of these crazy machines, the characters, even more than all of that, I think Furiosa is the one where I felt like the pacing of the movie just felt so right to me in being able to balance what he's going for emotionally as well as what he's going for in terms of that action spectacle aspect that those movies can't get away from and shouldn't because they are the most fun. Um and it really is, I think, um it is it is so much a movie because it goes back in the past. it I think it's very moving for me to see what that world looked like even a little bit in the past before complete destruction and everything. It just looked like it's rotting away, you know. Any signs of life seem so valuable that moment. So yeah, Furiosa and Trap. I don't know what you want me to say about Trap. I love an M. Night Shyamalan movie. This one is no exception. And hats off to anybody that can create half a movie that, to me at least, felt like a real concert. I've seen people complain about this and that not being right about the type of concert it is, how no person that age would take their dads to the concert. I don't know, man. I had to take my mom to concerts, which is probably worse. um, so to me it all felt right, and I apply I think his niece or daughter, whoever is playing the uh, who's playing the lead and the pop star is great. The movie is really funny. um, the movie weakens a little bit for me when it goes out of the concert to the domestic setting, partially because I think that whole idea of this family man hiding a dark secret and all the prestige TV that over the last few years and the Netflix true crime documentary, all of this feels like such more than too well trodden material. Uh, but it still has some really funny bits even there. And yeah, so fun time at the movies. Some of us still know how to do that.
What's your number 3, Nathan?
What's yours?
All I will say is I was shocked that you cheated and put in Trap when the obvious pairing for Furiosa is another film about mythic
Pushpa.
No, another film about mythic encounters in the desert, which is Lijo Jose Pellicer's Maliko di Volleyball, which is a better film than Trap. Anyway, my three is a skip.
Wild card.
My 3 is a skip, and so it's back to Jhon.
My number 2 of the year is a film that I wrote about at length for Lucky Star during my coverage of the Asian Film Festival of Dallas. It is Soi Chang's Twilight of the Warriors, Walled In. And Seema, I believe it's your number 6.
Yes.
This is probably the best. This is the best time I had at the movies, at the movie theater. Kind of like what you're talking about with Trap. I spent the entire weekend of that festival watching the trailer for this movie over and over again, like 14 times, sitting in my seat, and I did not lose any bit of excitement until I finally watched the movie. This is, a kind of requiem for the old guys of Hong Kong action cinema. Well, at least, Louis Koo is not really action a martial artist in that sense, but I found so much of this film unexpectedly moving because of the way that is, trying to kind of act as it's an active homage to a certain tradition of martial arts cinema, but it's also trying to find a way to move forward and say, hey, we can't just give up. We have to create a new generation of action stars. We got to find new ways to create stories because otherwise Hong Kong cinema is gonna cease to exist basically. If you can't find new actors, if you can't find new stories to tell, it's always going to be Louis Koo at like 65 years old, still being like a bachelor basically. This movie, the one thing that I still think is kind of funny, and I still don't know what to make of it, is the presence of superpowers in this movie. Like the main bad guy for some reason has spirit powers, which make him basically indestructible. Which, I mean, that goes back to, I believe, the comic book source, but it's such a funny wrinkle to throw in there and say, hey, this bad guy who is like a master martial artist, by the way, is also, his body is completely indestructible. He has spirit powers he's going to use to blow all of you away. So how can, in the middle of this, it's not a realistic movie, but it's still tied down to a certain tradition of martial arts. We're just going to introduce this completely crazy element to this one character and make him invincible. That really just tickled me. That was really fun. What do you think about it, Seema?
Oh yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, but also the rootedness of it also comes from the movie is set in the Walled City, which was this really bizarre vertical slum development in the middle of Hong Kong for decades, and it was completely closed, right? Nobody could go in or out. It's a lawless city. It's not really lawless, it just has its own laws and ways of enforcing those rules. And it's one of the most fascinating urban phenomenon that can exist. And the depiction of it, the way Soi Chiang shows us everything, including the economics of how a space like that can exist in the middle of Hong Kong, how it becomes a source of labor for the world outside of it, and so on, is all so correct and so detailed and so textured that, like you said, when the superpower thing comes in, it really just, you can't help but chuckle. But like you, I mean, I love this world so much and loved the movie so much. I'll take, and I mean, there's stuff like this in Indian movies too. There's like, Amitabh Bachchan's lucky locket saves his life all the time and stuff like that. So I have no problem with some elements of super. You call it supernatural, some call it superstition, whatever it is. Offering extra powers or protection to my protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, I took it as almost certainly comes from the source, right? There's that God, what's the name of that Donnie Yen movie from like 2007 or something, like something Dragon Gate or Tiger Gate or whatever, which is very similar kind of comics derived, new martial arts thing, which has similar power type stuff. But it feels to me almost like trying to like bring this sort of wuxia tradition stuff into the martial arts, into this new kind of context, and almost this desire to do all the types of this martial arts cinema, to really make this kind of comprehensive archive of this stuff, which is also very moving to me. And yes, just the articulation of the environment. It's a true neighborhood film, right? Like so much about it. I mean, that incredible like 20-minute stretch, when he first breaks into the walled city from outside, is this sort of running from these gangsters and from the police, and just sort of going from the level to level, seeing all of this stuff, this sort of articulation of this whole world that you just want to spend as much time as possible there. And of course the movie just sort of reminding you how ephemeral this is, how all of this is going to go away.
Yeah, and that
really
closing
unique.
shot of them just sitting looking at the world outside of the city. I think I'd heard so much about. I lived in Singapore when I was much younger, and I used to go to Hong Kong a lot, and so you would hear about the walled city, as a thing that kind of in the way that we talk about things in Bombay. All old cities have that, right? And but to see it, I really think this movie is the first time that I really. And then we ended up watching a documentary on the walled city, and yeah, the documentary is good. The movie is better. Yeah, just great movie. And also one of my favorite theatrical experiences. All of the Hong Kong movies I watched, we live in Queens now, which is great because we get to go to Tangram Mall to watch all these movies, and it's always a full house, and people really come out for these movies here, versus anywhere else I've lived where I've tried going out to watch Hong Kong movies.
Seema, what's your number two?
My number two finally is a movie called Vare by Mari Selvaraj.
Which
And
is my number 9.
yes, it's Nathan's number 9. And, a very important filmmaker for me for various reasons, but especially for his movie Periyarum Perumal, which is from
2017.
Yeah, 2017, which really, to me, there's a before Periyarum Perumal and a after Periyarum Perumal in some ways, about, so he's a he's a Dalit filmmaker, makes films about his caste, and about caste oppression in India. Vare is a little bit more complicated than that, and I'll come to that. But Periyarum Perumal is very distinctly about that. And the way that he approaches it in Periyarum Perumal, I think, really sets some kind of line in the sand for, reckon with this. And any movie where you're talking about caste after that has to kind of deal with the existence of this movie, I think this is his second. To me, I like all of his movies, but this is his other big work. It's based on a real incident that happened to to him when he was a child, where people of his community work in these huge banana plantations, and as labor, right, including children. And a tragedy happens, and an entire community gets wiped out in that tragedy. And he's making a movie about that experience of having been a child. And this, I don't think, is a spoiler, because he's not only does he say it in every interview, but it's also in the at the end of the film. There's a card in which he says, to the people, this is a tribute to all of the people we lost in that incident, from the one who survived. So the movie has this extreme weight of uh, to some degree of survivor's guilt, almost, that somehow I got lucky, and it's really, if when you watch the movie, it is by sheer magic, like sheer good luck, that he ends up not being a part of the people that end up dying in that incident, by playing, as kids do, by playing hooky and not going where he was supposed to be, being in a different place than where he should have been. um, it's a movie that wears this emotion very much front and center. And um, it's it's a movie that almost invariably will make you cry, just because of that loss of life, and knowing that it's real. It is a sad letter he's writing to his past. And every character in the movie feels like someone that he remembers distinctly. And there are very particular traits that only somebody, almost only a child that's really close to you can remember. It's little peculiar things that the person is attached to, or little habits they have of how they move something or the other about themselves, etc. And despite all that, it also has an extreme sense of joy of just being a child. And I think that's really important, because in order for that tragedy to have weight, I think it's important that the movie is able to show you that these people were not just oppressed labor that were like, depressed all the time, and it's a fate almost as bad as death. Quite the contrary, this was, these are happy families, young people who had dreams of, who are in love and have dreams of getting married. It's little kids who are dreaming of becoming Kamal Hassan and Rajnikant when they grow up, and are big fans of these movie stars. And I think Mari really feels like, not only did I survive, I am in a position where I'm in the land where Kamal Hassan and Rajnikant would talk to me. And what does that mean? So yeah, it was hugely successful. Not only was it successful, I think it's a movie that Tamil filmmakers, um, of his generation, of his group, are really proud of, which feels great that they feel like more movies are being made, and this movie particularly being made about our people. And I think there's something to be said for that. The movie made about our people that also happens to be commercially successful.
Yeah, I mean, Vetrimaran, who the filmmaker who sort of filmed Viduthalai, we were not able to get to because of it's sort of delayed release on streaming. Sort of said that Mari is the most important Indian commercial filmmaker right now, and it's sort of hard to kind of articulate the degree to which a Mari Selvaraj movie seems like an event. Like, it seems like a cultural event that sort of shifts it. And I think part of it is, a lot of sort of the focus of Tamil cinema since this sort of, even much before this, but specifically around this kind of new wave that starts in the 2000s, is this almost, how to say it, this incredibly precise articulation of the minutiae of daily culture and life and ritual and place and, you know, all of these things that just sort of make up what it is to be a person in this place, in this world at this time, you know. So it may mean, you know, famously, a funeral scene that takes 10 minutes and will like really like play up into all of this sort of ritual and emotion and that comes with that ritual and all of this, like in its minutia, right? And I think there's something about Mari Selvaraj's ability to frame it. And this is maybe his least straightforward narrative film, and as much as there's not kind of this like through line, there's not this sort of, you know, even like really hints of genre in it, you know. It's really just about this community and these sort of kids, but to take this kind of this tendency, you know, and somehow make take this kind of articulation of these memories or these customs and these rituals and these things and things often like specifically in these landscapes and transform it into something that's almost like kind of animist. There's this almost like religious power to sort of the way he frames these things, and especially with in conjunction with this sort of music. And here there's a really extraordinary score by Santosh Narayanan, who's his sort of collaborator since his first film. It just sort of, I don't know, like reaches this sort of level of like the epic and, you know, the kind of all the meanings of that word, all the while never kind of like straying from the perspective of these kids. It's really sort of extraordinary how the movie works, what kind of register it takes, because it really does. And all of his movies have this sort of ability to some varying degree. It really does just sort of hit you like a freight train.
Yeah.
Once this sort of everything kind of comes together, and it's kind of hard to explain how it does it. But there is something in which he's managing, I think, to create this kind of very specific wing of popular cinema that's very much his own and that just feels very crucial in a way that goes beyond even, you know, the sort of like immediate and very necessary political valence of the work. And I feel like really at odds trying to articulate exactly how and why it is, other than that weight feels like, I think, pretty undeniable.
The last thing, since you mentioned political valence, I think that one more thing that's really important is also that I think in Mari's films, I always get such a sense of pride for the community and for his people, which I think is another reason why all these filmmakers look at him and, you know, want to see how they can capture that, because I think a lot of them feel that way, but it's often hard to capture on film because he doesn't do it overtly. But there's something about the way he shoots them, the way his camera looks at them, that gives that sense of pride, right, and dignity. It's-
Nathan, what's your number two?
What's your number two?
Mine is a film called Un Prince by Pierre Criton. Criton is a figure I think I had just sort of been vaguely hearing about for years. You know, he's someone who seems to sort of make work that's partially documentary, that's sort of mid-length features. He's seems to pop up in other people's films, but none of it has really made it to the US so far. And friend of the site, Graham Carter, will be helping to distribute a bunch of sort of package of his films in 2025. So I'm very excited for that. But this film is a feature. It is this kind of very difficult to describe film about, oh God, how do you really even describe the movie? It's sort of a coming of age film of this young man who becomes part of this sort of, it's Brittany, right? Like Britain Coast community of much older gay men and horticulturists who he engages in romantic and sexual relations with and sort of ages. all of this is sort of plays in parallel to this almost entirely unseen figure of the prince, who's this little Indian child that is sort of brought in and adopted in this community. And so there's this very dense textural narration that plays out through the movie as you go into this incredibly detailed evocation of this world. There are these sort of beautiful drawings of almost sexual and in some places explicitly sexual drawings of plants. There's these scenes of sexuality in bodies and hunting. It's this very, and it all kind of comes into a head partway through the movie, in which the young main character literally falls asleep and wakes up in the older body of Pierre Creton, the director, in what is maybe, I think, the most extraordinary shot for me of the year. It's a film that feels completely singular. It feels like it has both a very, very sophisticated very literary understanding of fiction in this sort of 19th century fiction tradition, and almost medieval fiction traditions, which it plays with, I think, quite well. And at the other time, this very, very, very modern interest in the absolutely like most physical parts of the world of plants and bodies and sunlight and this sort of ways of life. Just a film I feel like I'll need to see another 2 dozen times to really understand what it does and how it does it. I don't think I've seen anything quite like it. It just feels like this incredibly exciting sensibility. And this sort of feels like this miracle because we haven't been able to see his earlier films, that it feels like you're introduced to something like completely coherent and lived in, like that. Like this is the culmination of a practice that has been going on for some time. It's the kind of thing you always hope is out there, and then sort of quite rarely get to actually experience or encounter.
We're down to our number one films after a long time. The one film that was in all three of our lists.
The official star number one, we might say.
Yes, possibly. I guess so. Kotukali is my number one, Nathan's number 3, and Seema's 5th pick. What a movie! This was not on. Honestly, I haven't seen Indian films for quite a while, and I kind of picked this one to start coming back, because I could sense there was excitement regarding it coming from you two, and it shocked me how good it was. There's a very confident sense of image making in this film. The most weird and like strange, shocking image that I think I saw all year was of the woman sticking out her tongue towards the eyeball, which is such a strange, almost off-putting, like kind of intrusion into the language of the film. You're like you start wondering, where the hell did that come from? What I find most impressive about this film is almost kind of the way it juggles, like 7 to 10 different characters, like flawlessly.
Yeah, we should quickly describe. It's a movie that it's basically a road trip. It's a road trip that this man, Sori, who is a major comedian.
You wouldn't know from watching the movie.
He's a major comedian,
No.
kind of lead actor, starting with Vetrimaran's Viduthalai Part 1. He's sort of come back after some time in absence. His voice is blown out. He takes in this rasp. He chain smokes constantly. He was supposed to marry this young woman in this sort of neighboring household to his. She has had a romantic affair of some sort with a classmate of a different caste background. the family found out. She has been sitting near comatose in basically in the corner. And at some point, it was suggested that they take her to an exorcist. And so the movie is essentially from this very slightly sketched out introduction to this premise, an A to B travel, which ends with them reaching this exorcist hut.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, and you have basically all these different family members who have kind of competing kind of interests and feelings toward what's actually happening. Like you have like the mom who is kind of trying to be protective. You have Suri who is terrifying in this film. uh, you have like the father who is kind of like, you know, what one step away from complete humiliation throughout the entire film. You have like the guys who are just kind of the driver who, you know, he's just trying to start the little car like 5 different times throughout the movie. And there's so much level of detail in the characterization of every single character. Even this girl who doesn't talk at all throughout the film, except possibly once, who we're able to access all of her feelings and thoughts just from her gaze, from the way she looks at the world around her. I found this to be such an impressive film. And there's no, you know, like I said, Suri in this film is terrifying because of the way that basically the violence that he kind of represents toward every character around him, because it's a violence that's sort of normalized and integrated into the fabric of the film. So when it erupts, which it does in this film, you feel like, you know, you feel like it's something that's been brewing up. Basically, even before the movie starts, you can feel that this violence has been there for a long time, and it's erupting again. I mean, you and me, Nathan, were talking about. I was asking you, like, hey, did I miss something about why Suri's voice sounds like that?
Right.
We're talking about it. And we're like, well, we think there's like an argument, big argument that happened before the movie that made him like lose his voice, right? But it's such a specific choice, and this was a specific choice of the character that makes what happens in this film, like, and what he does when he thinks he hears the character of humming. When he thinks he hears it, there's such a quick, terrifying reaction. And the way the violence spirals out from that is so sudden, so sharp, that it colors everything you've seen, because everything you've seen before, and it colors and taints with a real violence everything that goes forward, through the end of the film. Yeah, this was, honestly, I was so surprised. I need to go back and watch Pebbles, his debut film.
Yeah, so P.S. Vanillafudge, the director, is this sort of, you know, like this sort of fascinating mythology around him, right? He's basically this, like, he was like a child day laborer who essentially, if I understand correctly, like kind of is introduced to cinema seriously because he works as a delivery guy for this DVD shop. And the way he describes Pebbles Kulangal, his first movie, is a film that predominantly involves moving between these two
villages,
really. Two villages. And so it's this movie of these long shots of walking, and it's like he discovers early Alonso style formalism just by thinking about the physical weight of his childhood. And in this one, it's like the precision of the form just seems so completely tied to the scale and movement and emotional currents, and it's so precise. It's like he's just thinking about form from inside out somehow. Yeah. It's quite extraordinary. the scale of this movie is incredible because, like you said, you know, that shot with the eye is not so striking only because it's sort of so intrusive, but it's so large. Like, this is a movie where, like, the choice of when to, like, draw the camera away from this caravan, and it's this little jeepney thing called a auto rickshaw, you know, and these like 4 different bikes which are like all going at different. So the choice of like when to draw the camera away, when to go inside, when to be completely in front of someone's eye, when to focus on this rooster, this
there's a kid and a rooster in the back.
yeah, this rooster that goes throughout, like, just seems so correct. Like, everything feels right. And as you said, just laden with all of this violence. And at the same time, this is basically like, this happened to my friend Eric kind of story. You know, he's like, this is like, it's like, he's like, yeah, this is just some like, I remember this basically happened to a family member. You know, it has this feeling of just like something that happens in the community that you know about. It's not, it both is and is not the most important thing in the world.
Yeah, completely. And it's all the more because there's both in the news in India as well as in the movies, this kind of, if you take just the basic plot synopsis and the situation of this girl who is, almost betrothed to be married to this guy in her caste, is having an affair with guy from another caste. You expect that the families are upset and all of this happens. The father says that father has a heart attack, the mother threatens suicide. That's the usual way that these things are handled. And in this movie, really, and that's not what happens in real life necessarily, right? But in this movie, I really feel like all of these characters, who are part of the caravan outside of Suri, I think they all seem motivated to go on this journey only because they are so afraid of what Suri might do, that they all, that we have to do this as a group somehow, and somehow have a good resolution. That maybe if this girl is taken to the exorcist and he does his thing, Suri will buy that she has been, detoxed of her sentiments for this other dude, and then we can move forward. There's no real, like, the movie is so, like, completely devoid of drama in that sense, because outside of Suri's simmering anger throughout, there's no other real plot motivation of any sort. And Anna Ben, who's the girl titular, obstinate, Kotakali.
Yeah. The English title, they call it the Adamant Girl. Which sounds very formal, but as Seema described to me, the Kotakali, it's like the kind of thing that you say to like a child if the child is not like behaving. It's like, hey, Kotakali, they eat your dinner,
It's someone who's an adamant child, I guess. And because she doesn't speak at all, we don't really get to see her. She's not driving any dramatic points either, because she doesn't express sadness or fear or anything. She just
But at
seems...
the same time, her there's a sense of violence also from her.
Oh, and of course.
And so by the end of the movie, there's a sort of exchange of gazes between her and Sori that is...
I think the humming...
so much violence in those looks between the two of them. It's maybe the most extraordinary sort of gesture I've seen in a film this year.
I think the humming is the most violent gesture in the movie, actually, because it is such a... she at least to me, she knows exactly what she is doing by humming that song.
Yeah, there's a level of like social detail in the film that I found really remarkable. And kind of like I think at some point someone like basically declares like, we're only doing this out of social obligation.
Yeah.
Try to spare like the father like the embarrassment. And those social dynamics from like every character, kind of like knowing the kind of knowing their placement toward the actual relative.
Yeah.
Like some of them care a lot. Some of them don't really care. They're just kind of like doing this because like they have to. They don't have anything better to do, I guess, than to do this. That I found kind of a really interesting. And
Yeah,
what you
I
were
mean,
talking about. Go ahead.
yeah, coming to what I was saying about Tamil cinema with Balai, this sort of one of a very intelligent Twitter user named Pavivaksha, sort of said that this is sort of something that Tamil cinema, this movie specifically, is something that Tamil cinema has been building to for decades. This like precise articulation of all of this kind of social world and this ritual, and like all of it is. And to see it like this is really quite exciting.
Yeah. And it was unfortunate because the movie got released alongside like some really bad movies. And
well, what basically what happens is in India there is no in pretty much any of the industries there's no kind of separate tier of like art house distribution like we have. You have sort of some one or two maybe urban centers which will have stuff, and you'll have sort of private film clubs. What that basically means is that filmmakers who would otherwise be inclined to pure art house will often find a way to engage with the mainstream, right? Like someone like a Ram or a Mishkin. It also means that movies which are like this, which are quite art house, will just be released like a normal movie. So you get basically like the big youth hero, Siva Karthikeyan, who used to star in all these movies with Sori, like does a big audio launch, and they put this movie out into all of these theaters, and all these people come to see it, and so the arguments become very passionate. Like people are mad at this movie. There's a whole conspiracy theory that Siva Karthikeyan has teamed up with Dhanush because they're too worried about Sori's impending movie stardom that they made this movie to destroy his career. So it's very funny, that this movie, it becomes not this like cloistered sort of festival film, which it would be in almost any other country. It just sort of has been sent out into the world to kind of fend for itself and become something that people passionately argue about on like Tamil film Reddit. It's a interesting thing.
But I think it has found its audience. And Jhon, you and I talked about this, but it's kind of sad that despite this movie also had international festival recognition, people really liked his previous film as well. I just wish more people had already seen it, or at least I hope that more people will see it.
I love the idea of
people that watch Tamil
having
movies.
a music launch.
Maybe you should do a music launch. All right. What's up?
You too.
Yeah. Have this
Share
film number one.
Yeah, share number one.
You
What is it?
can announce.
Our number one is Merry Christmas by Sriram Raghavan. It is an adaptation of Bird in a Cage by the lunatic 1950s French crime writer Friedrich Dard, starring Michael Sullivan, Vijay Sethupathi, and Katrina Kaif, best known probably for Farrah Khan's Sheila Kijawani.
Sure.
It's a movie we saw very early in January.
We saw it on January 2nd in insane cold weather.
Far from Manhattan, in the only theater in the area where it's playing in Jamaica, Queens. It's now been demolished, that multiplex. Speakers were broken, and we're pretty much convinced the minute we saw it that it was going to be the best film of the year.
Yeah. Do you want me to say something?
Yeah, do you want to quickly describe the plot?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, the titular, it's Christmas Eve, and Vijay Sethupathi and Katrina Kaif meet. Katrina Kaif has a child with her. It's her child, and she's spending Christmas Eve alone with her child. Vijay Sethupathi has returned from somewhere after 7 years to his childhood home, where his mom is now passed away. So he inherits it. He's walking around Bombay on Christmas Eve because what else is there to do? The two of them end up spending Christmas Eve together. They go to her apartment, dance, because if you have Katrina Kaif with you, why wouldn't you? And then they drink a lot of wine. Stuff happens, and then there's a murder because Frederick Dern is a lunatic. That's the kind of books he writes. And so there's a murder, and then it becomes like this, police investigation movie in the second half. At least on paper, that's what this movie is.
Yeah. So the film centers around this kind of extraordinary conceit, which is sort of a play on the locked room mystery, which is that this woman who lives with her abusive, drugged out husband in this apartment in this sort of otherwise abandoned building where they have a bakery. Her plan to get away with the perfect murder is essentially to create on a separate floor of her apartment an exact replica of her apartment. So there's two of them. So that when she brings the person back in by manipulating the way in which she moves through the two apartments, one with her dead husband, one with no dead husband, she will be able to create essentially a perfect alibi and make it look like he's committed suicide because, of course, she was in the apartment the entire time. What I think is telling with Raghavan's take on this is that in the book, there's a very specific sentence he includes in which the character says that, oh yeah, I wanted to be a set designer when I was, a young adult. I studied all of the set design. So there's some way in which in the book, a very spare apartment can be recreated. Raghavan decides that plausibility is the furthest thing from it. And so he takes that line out, and in fact the apartment is incredibly furnished. And so this entire
meticulously furnished with lots of bric-a-bracs, like bric-a-bracs that are personal to you, that you would not find two of.
So this sort of staging of this woman's revenge becomes kind of miraculous, as does this sort of whole movie. This kind of strange drifting about. Satyapati is, of course, not just away from Bombay for 7 years. He's an ex-convict who's murdered his own wife. And so
a girlfriend.
A girlfriend, a girlfriend. And so this movie plays with these sort of ideas of guilt and confession and performance and staging in this pretty extraordinary way, and it just keeps sort of shifting in this mode. Raghavan is a cinephile filmmaker, in ways that are quite obvious. He called one of his earlier movies Johnny Gadar, right? But he's very attuned to this sort of tradition, this sort of pre-Amitabh Bachchan, Diwar Sholay genre tradition of like Hindi film in the 60s and early 70s, which is where this sort of like, where like a Cornell Woolrich novel, like the one that Mitchell Eisen made as No Man of Her Own, can turn into this extravagant 3-hour romantic melodrama and yet still keep this sort of bleak core of noir fiction to it. And this sort of does that, and I don't know, it just allows itself to it allows itself to wander in a gentle fashion and then constrict in a very hard and severe fashion.
Yeah. Because a lot of it really, if you take away the murder somehow miraculously, just close your eyes and watch the movie, or if you miss the murder part of the movie and just watch the movie, it really plays like this perfect, romance over one night kind of movie, which is a genre I really love. And Raghavan does a great job of it, of these two people meeting in, to me, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, not so much to other people, but meeting in this big city, but it's just the two of them. There's Christmas carols in the background. There's lights everywhere because it's Christmas, and then deciding that they want to bring in Christmas together. So it really plays like that, except that there's also this huge genre movie within this frame, um, and the daughter, the child in the movie, has been abused by the father. It's not clear in what way. The movie just only refers to like him being very angry with her all the time because he doesn't believe that she's his child. But it's a little vague about what form of abuse that took. But because of that abuse, she has stopped talking, so she doesn't speak at all. And the movie, there are so many little miracles. This movie is all about miracles, as Nathan said, right? So Vijay Sethupathiy's character tells a story to the child about a miracle that might get her speech back. And at the end of the movie, the way that the guilty person is found, the way that someone we don't want to get caught gets caught by the police, is because the miracle does occur and the child does speak. And the only time the child speaks in the movie, it gives away the murderer. And this is all very, it's so filmy with a big F, capital F in front of it. But that's very, I think, typically Sri Ram Raghavan. In the opening, he thanks both Shakti Samantha and Eric Romer. And there's not two more disparate filmmakers you could thank for a movie. And really, he also says that it's based on Ernst Lubitsch's The Merry Widow. And then it has like actual songs from
by
other,
Pritam.
by Pritam, that are like completely, evocative of older Hindi movies, or the actual songs from older Hindi movies. So it's got references. I mean, you can, if you're that kind of person, you can have a fun time like making a list of everything that's referenced in the movie. But really, despite all that, and this is how I feel about all his movies, two things. One is that even though he's such a filmmaker who likes putting references everywhere, he only goes out in public wearing movie t-shirts. This is a man who I think custom makes, like, literally nobody has ever seen him in anything but a t-shirt with a movie reference on it. Um, but so he does it in all of his movies, but you can tell a Sriram Raghavan movie immediately, even if you didn't see the opening credits or the closing credits, so it didn't have all these tribute names thrown in, you would still know. So it's just something. And I think part of that is two things about him. One is that his movies are both much more romantic than they appear or should be based on the plot premise, and they're also much bleaker than the romantic aspects of the movie will have you believing. And somehow he does both in Andhadhun, in Badlapur, in Ek Hasina Thi.
Yeah, they're very often films that seem to have like a secret discourse through them. This one specifically feels like a play on talismanic objects that like switch hands, wedding rings, paper cranes, snow globes, a bird in a cage, that just move through this sort of network of people and connections. And watch Chino Anand's Homemade Wine. Like, it's a film that has this very strange quality to it. It's a very, the kind of movie. His last movie was this sort of, and we talk a lot about the Hindi film industry being in this sort of horrible state. His last movie, Andhadhun, was this sort of a runaway word of mouth hit, and this is very much a filmmaker. He has a big movie coming next, a war movie. And this is very much a filmmaker, like knowing that this is the one chance he probably will get to get such an oddity financed. It feels like it just feels incredible that this movie exists in the state of Hindi film as it does.
Yeah.
he does seem like someone who is like primed for some sort of like breakthrough with cinephiles. I think it was his last movie that you said, the one with the
Underdone.
yeah, that one seemed like a really kind of like a popular film overall. You would think that he would have had some sort of breakthrough, but I don't think.
Yeah, yeah. If you were going to say like maybe besides Vishal Bhardwaj, like one Hindi filmmaker or Kashyap, but Kashyap is too inconsistent. Yeah, like one Hindi filmmaker who you think would be this sort of easy breakout hit, amongst a certain kind of cinephile, it would be Raghavan. And the fact that he hasn't been just, I think, means that nobody is looking. Because he has 4 or 5 movies that I think are among the best in this sort of, this sort of broad form of I guess, crime fiction, cinephilic crime fiction, and as anyone has made, and yet, I don't think he's ever really been programmed outside of India.
Yeah, they also don't play here though. In the theater, they don't get distributed here.
It's on Netflix, right? I think is it on Netflix?
Yeah, on Netflix, yes.
Yeah, there's no excuse on my end to not see it. Seema, Nathan, we have gone a long time talking about these films. It's been a pleasure. Now on the website, luckystarfilm.net, we have not just our list, but a list of other friends of the site, contributors in the background who have helped us with our text in one way or another. And we've also have 5. We also have a section on our list for 5 older films that we first saw this year, which we will let you see on the website. We're not going to talk about it today. Okay. But yeah, I mean, this has been a lot of fun talking with you two about these movies, and we hope we can do it again. Another one of these next year. We hope that we're still around. And I imagine the podcast will be back in February to discuss another film. And I imagine the podcast will be a lot shorter next time around.
Yeah, and they have re-released Pushpa 2.
Oh my god.
Pushpa 2, the re-release with extra scenes. It's now nearly 4 hours long. So technically, I expect to see that on our 2025 list.
But also, once again, shout out to LAFFD. Since you won't do it, Jhon, I will promote.
Yes, the Latin American Film Festival of Dallas, the www.laffd.com. I think that's right.
Yeah.
We're gonna announce our lineup next month. Perhaps some of these films will be on them. Will be on that lineup.
Yeah,
I don't know.
think now that you're doing screenings even outside of the festival, I think everyone should follow you on Instagram because they can see what's going on and get recommendations for movies to watch.
Yeah, well, you are signing me up to do extra work on Instagram, Seema, but okay, that's fine. Oh, sorry.
Where can people find you on Instagram, Jhon?
I do not know my own Instagram handle.
Where can people find us on Instagram, Seema?
I do not know.
I believe without looking, I'm gonna check right now.
Are we at the Lucky Star Film?
Lucky Star Film, I believe it is.
Lucky Star Film. Follow us on Instagram.
Usually I will post stories that something is happening soon, and then it won't happen for 6 months.
I think we should just promote the LAFFD.
Yeah, so Lucky Star Film. Yes, I am looking at it right now. Lucky Star Film on Instagram. We're also on our new president's social platform, X. We're on Elon Musk's website, X, which I think that's my Lucky Star Film. I really cannot remember. I can't remember.
I can't.
Blue Sky?
Oh yeah, we're also on Blue Sky. You can't remember that either. All of this, I swear to you, will be on the show notes. I'll make sure all this is in the show notes.
But this was a pleasure. Thank you, Jhon.
All right. Well, this episode is long enough as it is. Thank you,
Yeah.
Seema. Thank you, Nathan, for talking movies today. This has been the Lucky to Star podcast. Again, once again, you can find us on theluckystarfilm.net. Thank you for listening.